What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 12 Games of Christmas presented by the Unlockables podcast. I'd like to thank you for tuning in wherever, whenever in time and space you might be located. My name is Eric. I am your host, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in to yet another day of the 12 Games of Christmas. And if you've been keeping track, checking the advent calendar, checking your dates, today is the 12th and final game of Christmas, and I'm very excited to be sharing it with you. Once again, thank you so much to everybody that has been a part of this, has been on an episode, has listened, has given me words of encouragement, has told me how much they liked it, or maybe told me how much they didn't like it. I don't know. I'm recording all these way in advance, so this could be the most terrible thing that I've ever done. I'm not sure, but I really appreciate everybody who's been a part of it. It's been a lot of fun to do, and I felt it fitting that since this is my show, The Unlockables, and is a celebration of video games and a celebration of the show in the year 2022, that I should close this one out by myself, because my project has been primarily a solo podcasting project. I've had on 10 other incredible guests that have helped me celebrate Christmas, celebrate video games, celebrate Unlockables in the year 2022. I think it's time to close it out with some thoughts from me, myself, and I about the final game that I wanted to talk about. Not because I was saving it for last for a specific reason, but because I literally just beat it a few days ago and wanted to make sure that I had some time to sit on it, think about it before I gave my thoughts. And those of you that have talked to me already know that that game is none other than God of War Ragnarok. God of War Ragnarok, better known by its Christian name, Dad of Boy Puberty Edition, was developed by Santa Monica Studios and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. It was released worldwide on November 9th, 2022. The most recent, probably most relevant, up-to-date game that we will talk about on the 12 Games of Christmas. It is, because this is the last day. So was waiting for this one to kind of see how things would shake out, and needless to say, it didn't disappoint, because here it is on the 12 Games of Christmas. Some early ratings for God of War Ragnarok. On Metacritic, it is sitting at a pretty damn good 94. Game Informer, 9.5 out of 10. GameSpot, 9 out of 10. IGN, 10 out of 10. A masterpiece rating from IGN. Who boy, that means this one must have been pretty good, right? It is the fastest selling Sony first-party game in history, selling 5.1 million units the first week it was out. Just to put a little bit of a tidbit on there, I wanted to compare this. Another well-known game from a well-known franchise came out in November as well, and will not be making the 12 Games of Christmas just because I haven't finished it yet, and I still don't know how I feel about it. It is, of course, Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet, and just for a comparison, those games sold 10 million copies in 3 days, despite how awful they are. That was 4.05 million units in Japan alone. So let me just put this, there's so much anger and yelling and frustration around Xbox versus PlayStation and PlayStation AAA exclusives, and a shitty Pokemon game comes out that can't even run on the hardware that it's on and outsells it by double in 3 days. So Nintendo is playing a different game than everybody else, and Xbox and PlayStation just wish they had the cash cows that Nintendo had, just to kind of poke the bear there. That being said, this game still did well. Like I said, it was the fastest selling Sony first party game in history. Obviously, the fastest selling game in the God of War franchise. Obviously, probably going to be the most successful game in the God of War franchise. As of this point, it has been nominated for a literal assload of year of end awards, including Game of the Year by everybody from the Game Awards to all the major publications. This game is getting the nods, which we kind of expected. Honestly, no surprise there. This and Elden Ring were probably the two biggest ones that people were waiting for this year. For the Christmas meter, I gave this game an 8 out of 10 candy canes. It's Fimbulwinter, baby. Nothing like a little Christmas spirit to ring in the end of the world, ending the literal world with Ragnarok. Might as well do it with a freezing blizzard that covers all of Midgard. Still not as bad as winter in the Midwest, I would argue, but we would have to see if the Norse deities would survive the brutal Midwest cold and winters. So, that is the game. Of course, it had to be, right? There wasn't really any other way that this year was gonna end. Ragnarok was the one that a lot of us were waiting for. And it was probably one of my most anticipated games this year. Because for those of you who don't know or haven't heard me talk about it, or maybe this is your first time listening to Unlockables, the first God of War game with Kratos and Atreus was my game of the year for 2018. So it was obvious that this game was very, very hyped and had a very, very high expectation to live up to. And the funny thing about games that have incredibly high expectations to live up to is that it's very, very difficult to achieve what people have perceived in their mind as what this game will be with all of the hype surrounding it. Just based on reactions to a game I didn't play this year, Elden Ring, it sounds like that game was able to mostly live up to the hype that for months and months people were so excited about this game coming out, and it managed to deliver on what was promised. That's a very difficult thing to do. I have very, very dear concerns for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom when that game comes out, just because the specter of Breath of the Wild in the industry in video games is so enormous that the comparisons when you choose to have a sequel in a beloved world like Breath of the Wild is going to put immense pressure on that game to deliver and somehow outdo the first game, which Breath of the Wild is now, similar to the vein of Dark Souls, a adjective by which people use to describe other video games. So God of War was kind of in the same vein. For me, God of War 2018 was my favorite Sony exclusive game because it did a couple of things, and it did a couple of things that are important in my consideration when I consider a game for Game of the Year. Anytime that I have a game that completely eats my time, makes me lose track of time, that's pretty much one criteria, and is the reason why Monster Hunter Rise was my Game of the Year last year. God of War didn't eat my time in 2018, but it did something else that I hold in very high regard. It told me a story and gave me an experience that subverted my expectations, and it made me care about a franchise and a character that I didn't really care about at all. Prior to 2018, I didn't really care about Kratos. I didn't really care about God of War. It just seemed to me like a mindless violence game. The character of Kratos didn't really resonate with me at all. I know a lot of his history and his character just through absorbing pop culture and being steeped in the community of video games for so long and watching YouTube videos and mashup TikToks and all this other stuff about segments of Kratos' adventures before 2018. So I didn't really have high expectations going into the 2018 God of War, and it really blew me away by reinventing and repackaging a character like Kratos and presenting him to me in a way where he was very closed off, very vulnerable to opening himself up to outside feelings, and then giving us the story where the very start of that God of War is his wife dies, and now he's entrusted with the burden of raising his young son, something that you would never expect the Kratos from the old God of War games to be emotionally capable of. And that game delivered such an endearing father-son story that it really touched me in a way that I did not expect. That, and it was just a damn fun game to play, and the length of it I thought was perfect. I experienced exactly as much of that game as I wanted to, and it really changed my expectations. So much so that Ragnarok was a game that I was waiting for, and one of my most anticipated games for a very, very long time. Now, that being said, about subverting expectations and setting up the story and all this kind of stuff, what I'm about to say does not discredit this game. God of War Ragnarok does not do this for me in 2022. In many ways, it feels like a known quantity with quality of life improvements sprinkled in along the way. When I picked up Ragnarok and spent about an hour or two with it, it felt familiar. It felt like I was playing an extension of the 2018 God of War. Yes, I was playing it on the PS5. Yes, it looked great. There were some quality of life things that were fixed. Everything was tightened up just a little bit. But that being said, all in all, to me personally, I felt like it was more of the same. It was more of something I had experienced 4 years ago, coming from a gameplay perspective. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I think that in this age of cutting edge video games, most of us have been pretty spoiled. And every major hyped announcement that comes out, we expect to break or reinvent the industry in some kind of way and leave a mark on the industry in some kind of way. The way that Breath of the Wild did, the way that the first God of War did, the way that Elden Ring probably is going to. But Ragnarok is more of the same. It is more of the first God of War with some things that I would consider quality of life improvements. If they would have just thrown this game on the end of the first and just made like a Ragnarok DLC that was like 30 hours long, I probably wouldn't have blinked or bat an eye. And not every game has to do this. Not every game has to reinvent the wheel. If you have a game that has a compelling story and that is just fun to play, a lot of the times that is enough. But the standard for these Sony games has been set so high that anything less than a groundbreaking, perfect experience seems like it's not enough. There are some very good quality of life improvements. I like a lot of things that Ragnarok did. No longer having to use Tyr's Temple to move between the realms just expedites you being able to move about and explore the different worlds. I think that's really great. The way you just have a rock and you can find a gateway in the world and travel to a different realm. That cuts out things immediately. You don't have to go back to Midgard every time you want to freaking change worlds or do something or row around the lake to do something else. I think it's incredibly streamlined in that way. They do give you access to a new weapon, no spoilers, that changes things up and gives you more options in combat, as well as some new skills for an Atreus that is getting older and starting to come into his own magical godlike abilities that change the way you play the game, that change the way you approach combat. And I think that's great. If it wasn't broke in 2018, don't fix it. And don't add so much to it that this game is unrecognizable. Add little tweaks and add little adjustments along the way to make the game a more enjoyable experience. The thing that did hit me for Ragnarok was the continued character growth between Kratos and Atreus. It continues from the first game and is just, it's incredible. They go through their ups and downs as fathers and sons do, which makes the emotional payoff at the end feel earned and makes the emotional payoffs through touching moments where they're fighting or where they reconcile or where they're talking to each other really, really pay off. And about the halfway through the story of Ragnarok, like we really start to see Kratos soften and express himself to his son in a way that I did not expect. And it's Kratos' continuing journey of how to be a parent. You know, his son is growing up and he has trained his son, and how Atreus is frustrated by the problem that a lot of teens have where, his dad doesn't trust him and isn't trusting him to make the right decisions or do the right things or try and figure things out. Whereas Atreus doesn't understand that Kratos is just coming from the perspective of wanting to protect his son from what seems to be an inevitable conclusion for their journey, which might surprise you as you play through this game. And again, there aren't going to be any spoilers here or anything, so you don't have to worry about that. What is also awesome about the storytelling is that it not only includes the family of Kratos and Atreus, but it really focuses on two other main family relationships as well. They really expand on the character of Freya in this game. If you don't remember from 2018 God of War, spoilers, skip ahead like 30 seconds. At the end of that game, Kratos and Atreus killed Balder, Freya's son, despite the fact that Balder was trying to kill Freya. And that kind of comes to a head in the early hours of this game. And it also explores Freya's relationship with her ex-husband Odin, who, based on Freya's accounts, abused her, made it so that she can't travel different realms, trapped her on Midgard, just did a bunch of horrible things to not only her, but literally everybody in the 9 realms. It also introduces her brother, Freyr, as a character, and to kind of see how all these relationships had been established in the past and how they're doing now and how they go into the future is actually super interesting. And then the other familial story that takes place is that between Thor and Odin, and that between Thor and his family. If you don't remember from the first game, again, spoilers for 2018 God of War, fast forward like 30 seconds, you kill Magnus and Modi, which are 2 of Thor's sons. Not that Kratos wanted to do that, but you do end up killing them. And that kind of plays into it as well as Thor's relationship with Odin, where Odin kind of treats Thor like a big, dumb, drunk idiot who is fit for only one thing, and that's to follow his commands. So I think that the theme they were going for God of War Ragnarok is really, it's a story about growing up. It's a story about letting go of past trauma and not letting it control you. And it's a story ultimately about family, the family we are born with and the family that we choose. Hammering home some really unique points that the family that we are born with is not necessarily the most important family and doesn't have to define us. And sometimes the family that we choose can be more important than the family that we're born into. And all of this combined with, again, the incredible budding relationship of Kratos and Atreus makes for a really, really awesome story, a really touching story. And those of you that know me know that story is something that I value very, very much in a video game. Yes, a video game does have to be fun to play. No, I think that these Sony third-party games are not going to be for everyone. They're very much a known quantity at this point. A lot of them are these over-the-shoulder, third-person, semi-open/open world cinematic adventures that tell a grand story and have a grand sense of scope and a grand sense of world. Ragnarok's no different. That's a known quantity. And those types of games are not going to be for everybody. And now that Sony has done 4, 5, 6 of these games, people are like, all right, let's see what else they can do. Let's see what else Sony has to offer. So anybody coming to Ragnarok expecting the experience to just be elevated so far and above and beyond the first one is probably going to be disappointed and be let down, because that is not what this game is. It is very much an extension, a continuation of the 2018 God of War, meant to wrap up the story of Kratos and Atreus. And I think that Santa Monica knew that this was the last game they wanted to make, because otherwise there's just going to be 3 games of like roughly the same thing. So I think it was a good idea to have a little bit of a longer second game and kind of wrap up that story. And no spoilers, but the story does kind of get left open at the end to revisit some of these characters, ideas, places, lands, or maybe go off to even new lands in the future. Now, I don't think that's spoiling the story at all, but I feel like the ending is open-ended enough that it leaves it open if Santa Monica ever wants to revisit these ideas in the future. Speaking of expanding on the story of all of the other characters involved, there's a lot more side content this time. In every single realm, there is a ton of side quests that you can do. And a lot of these are like main side quest story missions for like characters that you have met, that you're traveling with, things of that nature. So for example, Freya has a pretty cool side quest that you go on where you discover more of her relationship with her ex-husband Odin, how that whole marriage came to be about, the worlds of Vanaheim and Asgard, and kind of how they intermingle, the bad blood between the Vanir gods and the Aesir gods. And that's a lengthy side quest where you learn a lot of information about Freya, and you're kind of more able to sympathize with her character, and it really fleshes out Odin as this just terrible fucking person who has hurt so many people along the way. And that's just one of the side quests. Each of the, I would say, main side characters has probably a side quest that expands a little bit on their story, or has a portion of the main quest that has to deal with them specifically. And it really makes it feel like Kratos and Atreus are kind of stumbled into this story that's been ongoing for centuries between all of these characters that have bad blood. And I think that for a character like Kratos, who is trying to avoid war, who is trying to turn the page on his past life and is trying to be a better person and not get involved in violence and not get involved in god killing, I think it's interesting how he navigates these relationships along with his son, who has an open heart and just wants to help people. One of the things I also really like about this too is I think the way that they implement Mimir in this world is brilliant. If you don't know, Mimir is like the know-it-all god. He's very knowledgeable. In the first game, he was tied to a tree and trapped there forever, so you had to chop off his head and basically reanimate it. And Kratos carries around his head on his hip, on his belt, basically. And Mimir is able to have conversations with everybody as you're traversing the world. And what'll happen is if you're like on a canoe and canoeing to a place, or walking through the world, or traversing, trying to get to an area, Mimir will strike up conversation and tell stories about the world, or about his past, or about the past of some of the gods, to kind of fill in the blanks about why these characters have struggle and strife and anger towards one another. And I think this is a brilliant way to not only fill the empty space of travel with important lore and important story information, but it's also a brilliant way to build out your world and make it feel like these things have been happening long before Kratos showed up in this world seeking refuge from his old life, that these are centuries old feuds, these are century old hurts that these characters have suffered, and it makes the world feel more realized. It makes the world feel more full. And for a person who places so much stock and value on story and lore, not having to go out of my way to experience all of it, I think this is a really cool, really personal touch. Like, yes, I know that characters talk a lot, all this stuff, but I think it's a really cool way to kind of insert that in there. And it doesn't lead to long stretches of silence of exploring when, you know, you're backtracking and looking for certain things, or trying to solve puzzles, or just traversing the world. I think it's great. I think Mimir is a perfect way to do that. And before you meet Odin in Ragnarok, you only have the stories of Mimir to go off of, to kind of envision in your head what he's like. And all the stories that Mimir and all these other characters have about Odin make him out to be this incredibly evil, this incredibly manipulative, like, person that doesn't care about anybody but himself, and is willing to hurt anybody along the way to achieve his goals. I think it sets this really, really cool expectation of like what Odin is going to be. And then when you finally meet him in the early hours of the game, it's very, very cool to kind of see how they did that. And I don't want to spoil too much in that. I think it's something you should definitely just experience for yourself. Like I said, Sony first-party titles at this point are a known quantity. We know what the God of Wars are like. We know what the Horizon Zero Dawns and Forbidden Wests are like. We know what Uncharted is like. We know what Last of Us is like. Even Spider-Man, which is a little more open, is still that third-person open world exploring icon game. And that's what Sony is going to continue to do going forward, because these games have been successful for them. These games have created a competitive advantage for them in their mind, is that the PlayStation is this place where you're getting these premier cinematic experiences. And whatever your opinions on that are, that is the truth that we live in. Do I think that God of War Ragnarok reaches the heights or surpasses 2018 God of War? I won't say that it does, but it is a fitting conclusion to the story it's trying to tell. And I'm not saying Ragnarok is any worse than 2018 God of War. I do think, all things considered, it is a better game, but there was no way that this game was going to live up to the immense hype that it had built around it before it came out. There was no possible way. I don't know what people's ideal vision of what this game was going to be was, but it's more God of War. And that's not a bad thing. And I think because of that, it's the story it told makes it one of my favorite games that I played this year, hands down. It makes it a game that's worth talking about at the end of the year. I better talk about this one because y'all know I definitely didn't play Elden Ring. So I have to, if I want to be a quote unquote real video game podcast, have to talk about one of the super hype games that came out this year. I don't really think there's much more I could say about this game without going into spoiler territory. So I think we'll leave it at that because it is still a relatively new game and I don't want to spoil it for anybody that wants to experience it. I think it's a story worth experiencing. So if you have the opportunity, the games go on sale, maybe you have PlayStation Now or PlayStation Game Pass or whatever the hell it's called, and these games come available, I would definitely check them out. I think it's definitely one of the best cinematic experiences in video games that you can have, for sure. If it's not your cup of tea, that's fine too. Sony gonna Sony. But I think it's a fitting game to end the 12 games of Christmas. With that being said, we are going to conclude this incredible journey that we've been on. I just want to say one thing to everybody who participated, who listened, who gave me encouragement, who hyped me up when I thought that I wasn't going to see this idea through or finish it, who have been a part of the Unlockables for the first year, whether it's been as a guest, whether it's been as a person who's listened, who's talked to me, who's joined the Discord, who's interacted with my posts on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you all so much. I couldn't have done it this year without you. It has been an incredibly challenging year, filled with life changes, filled with new things I've learned, new friends I've made. And yeah, it's been a crazy 12 days. That's, 3 months of my regular content compressed into a little over a week and a half. Even if they were only 20, 30, 40-minute long episodes, it was still quite the undertaking to schedule everyone, to record everything, to get everything edited, to make time for all of my other responsibilities. And I hope by the end of this that you guys enjoyed it and it was something that was special and unique, because I really enjoyed doing it. And again, it wouldn't have been possible without the support of all of you. So thank you so much. If you'd like to find me and talk to me about the 12 games of Christmas or about anything else, you can look at the link tree in the description of my Twitter or my Instagram. It's linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. Click on the link to the Discord there and join our Discord. I panically made a Discord server because I thought Twitter was going to collapse and sink into the ocean, much like the Titanic. But it did not. It survived, I think, still. And I guess we'll see how that turns out. My dogs are getting antsy in the background. If you can't hear them clip clapping, ringing the bells, all that. So I will leave you guys with that. And I would like to wish everybody listening a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, whatever your preferred way of celebrating is. Happy New Year's. And yeah, I just hope you guys all have a wonderful holiday celebrating with your friends, family, and loved ones. Have a good night.